Remember 1969? The cast of Battle of Britain seemed untouchable, heroes burning with courage and strength. But over 50 years later, reality tells a darker story. Most of them are gone. Cancer, heart attacks, sudden tragedies. Their endings were harsher than any script. So what really happened after the movie ended? Stay with me, because the answers may shock you. Christopher Plummer as squadron leader Colin Harvey. You remember him as the fearless squadron leader Colin Harvey in Battle of Britain 1969. At just 40, Plummer embodied the spirit of the Royal Air Force, a pilot whose courage reflected the desperate fight for survival. He looked like a hero on screen, but his real life told a far darker story. Christopher Plummer was born on December 13, 1929, in Toronto, Canada. His first marriage to actress Tammy Grimes collapsed in 1960, leaving him estranged from their daughter Amanda, a wound that never fully healed. His second marriage to Patricia Lewis carried its own tragedy, a devastating car crash that left her in a coma for weeks. Though she recovered, their love did not. By the time he found stability with his third wife, actress Elaine Taylor, he had already lived through years of broken promises and loneliness. Then came his most destructive companion, alcohol. In the 1950s, Plummer nearly lost his life driving drunk, later admitting he had spiraled so far he barely recognized himself. By the 1970s, he forced himself into sobriety, but the scars of addiction haunted him for decades. He wore elegance on the outside, but inside, he fought a battle every day. On February 5, 2021, Christopher Plummer died at the age of 91, 2 weeks after a fall at his Connecticut home. His fortune, about $20 million, seemed small compared to the love he inspired. Julie Andrews mourned him as a cherished friend, and Canada sealed his legacy on a postage stamp. A hero on screen and a legend forever remembered. Laurence Olivier as Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. In Battle of Britain, 1969, he stood tall as Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the steady hand that saved Britain's skies. Laurence Olivier was 62 when he played that role, and his presence was magnetic. But away from the cameras, his life was not the story of calm command. It was chaos, heartbreak, and pain. Laurence Kerr Olivier was born on May 22, 1907, in Dorking, Surrey, England. Decades later, he would be celebrated as one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, but his private life was far from glorious. His marriage to Vivien Leigh, the dazzling star of Gone with the Wind, became a 20-year battlefield. Her bipolar disorder brought violent swings between brilliance and despair, while his own affairs only deepened the wounds. Their love looked golden in public, but behind closed doors it was tearing them both apart. The suffering didn't end there. Arthritis struck him down, forcing him onto morphine, and a degenerative muscle disease slowly stripped him of his strength. Yet even in agony, Olivier never stopped working. He played villains, kings, and even Lear himself, pouring pain into art while his body betrayed him. Fans saw triumph. He felt torment. On July 11, 1989, Laurence Olivier died at 82. His net worth was around $20 million, but money meant little compared to the legacy he left. His ashes were laid to rest in Westminster Abbey's Poets' Corner, a place reserved for Britain's greatest voices. His final standing ovation, eternal and unforgettable. Ralph Richardson as Sir David Kelly. At 67, Ralph Richardson joined Battle of Britain, 1969, portraying Sir David Kelly, the British ambassador in Switzerland. His performance carried the steady authority of diplomacy in a world on the brink. Yet away from the set, his life was anything but steady. It was marred by tragedy, loss, and failing health. Ralph David Richardson was born on December 19, 1902, in Cheltenham, England. In 1944, he married actress Mariel Forbes, and together they built a life rooted in love and theater. But joy turned to sorrow when their only son died of illness in the 1940s. The couple endured, but the loss left a wound that never closed. Friends recalled their devotion to each other, but also the quiet grief that shadowed their home. Richardson clung to the stage for solace, but his body betrayed him. A lifelong smoker, he carried his addiction everywhere, and slowly it eroded his strength. The brilliance audiences saw on stage came at the cost of private suffering, a man who gave his all to his craft while his health slipped away. Ralph Richardson died on October 10, 1983, after a sudden stroke at the age of 80. His wealth, about $5 million, was modest compared to his reputation. Buried in London, he remains one of the great theatrical knights, remembered not only for his mastery of Shakespeare, but also for the resilience he carried through unbearable loss. Trevor Howard, as Air Vice Marshal Keith Park. At 56, Trevor Howard brought to life Air Vice Marshal Keith Park in Battle of Britain, 1969. On screen, he was sharp, disciplined, and unshakable, a strategist who commanded respect. Off-screen, though, Howard was a man slowly drowning in habits that would eventually take everything from him. Trevor Howard was born on September 29, 1913, in Cliftonville, England. He married actress Helen Cherry, and for a time, they seemed inseparable. But behind closed doors, their marriage crumbled. The arguments, the disillusionment, and the final split left Howard reaching for the only comfort he could control: the bottle. Alcohol became his daily refuge, and what began as social drinking turned into full-blown dependence. The cost was devastating. His body began to fail, his liver crumbling under years of abuse. By the 1980s, Howard was no longer the strong leading man audiences remembered. He was frail, coughing, and visibly ill. Friends whispered about how much he had changed, and those who knew him best watched helplessly as addiction consumed the man who once stood so tall. Trevor Howard died on January 7, 1988, at the age of 74. His estate was valued at around $8 million, but no number could measure the tragedy of his decline. He remains immortal on screen, yet in life, he was proof of how even the greatest warriors can lose their battle to demons no one else can see. Michael Redgrave, as Air Vice Marshal Evil. When Battle of Britain premiered in 1969, audiences saw Michael Redgrave at 61, embodying Air Vice Marshal Evil with poise and authority. He seemed untouchable, the very image of discipline. But the man behind the role carried secrets and sorrows that would one day shock even his own family. Michael Redgrave was born on March 20th, 1908, in Bristol, England. His marriage to actress Rachel Kempson lasted 5 decades, but loyalty was never its foundation. Affairs haunted their union, leaving scars not only on Rachel but also on their children, Vanessa, Corin, and Lynn, who grew up in the shadow of fractured trust and emotional turmoil. The glittering Redgrave dynasty looked golden from the outside, yet inside it was fractured, fragile, and deeply human. Then came the cruelest twist: Parkinson's disease. For years, directors mistook his trembling and faltering speech as drunkenness, never realizing he was battling a relentless illness. The man once praised for his powerful stage presence was slowly stripped of his body, his voice, and his independence. Audiences saw only fading brilliance, but his family witnessed a legend wasting away. Michael Redgrave died on March 21st, 1985, one day after his 77th birthday. His net worth was around $10 million, yet his most symbolic legacy lies in St. Paul's, Covent Garden, the Actors' Church, where his ashes rest. A man once larger than life, remembered as much for the dynasty he created as for the pain he carried to his grave. Harry Andrews as senior civil servant. If you've seen Battle of Britain, 1969, you might remember Harry Andrews at 58, stepping into the role of a senior civil servant. the kind of man whose clipped tone and steady posture symbolized government power during crisis. On screen, he looked untouchable, but his own life told a story far less secure. Harry Andrews was born on November 10, 1911, in Tunbridge, England. His first marriage fell apart, leaving behind bitterness and financial strain that never fully lifted. Later, he found something more real and enduring, a partnership with fellow actor Basil Hoskyns that lasted more than 3 decades. In an era when such love had to be hidden, theirs became a bond of loyalty lived in silence, a quiet rebellion against the loneliness that once defined him. Illness, however, could not be hidden. Years of declining health and a severe cardiac condition weakened the actor who had once filled screens with strength. By the end, a viral infection left him bedridden, his booming voice silenced. To those who admired his roles, the contrast was shocking. The man who embodied power on film reduced to frailty in life. Harry Andrews died on March 6, 1989, at the age of 77. His estate was valued at around $5 million. Today, he rests beside Basil Hoskyns in East Sussex, a final gesture that speaks louder than any role he ever played. Love, loyalty, and truth, carved into eternity. Kenneth Moore as Group Captain Baker. When Battle of Britain, 1969, landed in cinemas, Kenneth Moore was 55, commanding the screen as Group Captain Baker. He brought authority and warmth to the role of a leader in the skies. But behind that steady smile was a man whose private life was far less orderly than his on-screen command. Kenneth Moore was born on September 20th, 1914, in Gerrards Cross, England. He married 3 times, and each story carried its own heartbreak. His first 2 marriages ended in divorce, leaving behind children and estrangement. Then came his scandalous decision to leave his second wife for actress Angela Douglas, who was 26 years younger. The move shocked friends and family, creating deep rifts he never fully healed. As if broken marriages weren't enough, disease came for him early. Parkinson's struck in the 1970s, stripping away his energy, his balance, and eventually his career. Moore himself admitted in his later writings how humiliating it was to depend on others just to walk or stand. A man once adored for his charm and wit was reduced to trembling, silence, and despair. Kenneth Moore died on July 12, 1982, at 67. His fortune was valued at about $6 million, but the real story was his courage in facing the illness that hollowed him out. His memorial at St. Paul's Covent Garden became the final salute to an actor who had once been Britain's golden boy, yet ended his life locked inside a body that betrayed him. Kurd Jurgens as Baron von Richter. Some villains are unforgettable. In Battle of Britain, 1969, Kurd Jurgens, then 54, played Baron von Richter, a German officer whose icy presence brought menace to the screen. His towering frame and piercing eyes made him perfect for the role, but his private life was far more turbulent than any script could capture. Kurd Jurgens was born on December 13, 1915, in Sollen, Germany. He married 5 times, and nearly all ended in divorce. Glamour and passion gave way to jealousy, distance, and scandal. His affairs with stars like Romy Schneider made headlines, but none of his romances lasted. The cruelest blow came when his younger lover, Matilda Mizart, died in a sudden accident, leaving him broken, unable to outrun the chaos of his own relationships. His health collapsed under the weight of excess. A heavy drinker, Jurgens suffered repeated heart attacks, even claiming after one that he had died and gone to hell before doctors revived him. The man Brigitte Bardot, once nicknamed the Wardrobe for his sheer size, was reduced to weakness and fragility, betrayed by the very lifestyle that had defined him. On June 18, 1982, Kurd Jurgens died of heart failure in Vienna at 66. His fortune, about $10 million, mattered less than the scale of his funeral. Thousands gathered, and fighter jets flew overhead in salute. His life ended as dramatically as it was lived, with spectacle, with tragedy, and with the memory of a man who seemed too big for the world he left behind. Nigel Patrick as Group Captain Hope. At 57, Nigel Patrick appeared in Battle of Britain, 1969, as Group Captain Hope, a dignified officer who embodied calm under pressure. He carried himself with wit and authority on screen. In life, though, his battles were fought against vices and losses that slowly wore him down. Nigel Dennis Patrick Wemyss Gorman was born on May 2, 1912, in London, England. His personal life was as dramatic as any stage play. He married actress Beatrice Campbell in 1951, and for nearly 3 decades they were inseparable. But the weight of earlier failed relationships, whispered infidelities, and his growing dependence on alcohol cast long shadows. When Beatrice died in 1979, Nigel was left broken, drinking more heavily to numb the grief. It was tobacco that finally sealed his fate. A lifelong smoker, Patrick developed lung cancer that spread rapidly. The man once praised for his urbane charm and effortless stagecraft was reduced to weakness, coughing through his final years. Friends who remembered his elegance were stunned by the speed with which illness consumed him. Nigel Patrick died on September 21, 1981, at the age of 69. His estate, worth around $4 million, mattered little compared to the sorrow of his decline. He was laid to rest in London, reunited in memory with Beatrice. His final story was not one of glamour, but of love, loss, and the price of habits that refused to let him go. Susanna York, as Section Officer Maggie Harvey. When Battle of Britain, 1969, hit theaters, Susanna York was only 30, bringing a spark of youth and determination to her role as Section Officer Maggie Harvey. She shone with vitality on screen, but her real story would later unfold as one marked by heartbreak and illness. Susanna York was born on January 9, 1939, in Chelsea, England. In 1959, she married Michael Wells, and together they had 2 children. But the marriage fractured under pressure, ending in divorce by 1976. The deepest wound came later, when her beloved son Orlando died young, a tragedy she carried silently, channeling grief into her art, while refusing to let the world see how broken she was inside. Her strength faltered in 2010, when doctors diagnosed her with bone marrow cancer. Defiant, she refused chemotherapy, determined to keep working. Even as her body weakened, she honored stage commitments, performing with quiet courage while hiding the severity of her illness. Those who saw her on stage in her final months had no idea they were watching a woman already in her last battle. On January 15, 2011, Susanna York died at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London, aged 72. Her net worth was about $5 million. Though she left the world quietly, she is remembered as one of Britain's most luminous talents, a woman who carried both triumph and unbearable sorrow with grace, leaving behind a legacy etched in film and in loss. Robert Shaw as Squadron Leader Skipper. In Battle of Britain, 1969, Robert Shaw was only 42 when he took on the role of Squadron Leader Skipper, a hardened RAF pilot. His sharp presence gave the film grit and realism. But away from the cockpit and cameras, Shaw's life spiraled into turbulence he could never quite escape. Robert Shaw was born on August 9, 1927, in Westhoughton, England. He married 3 times, and each relationship carried its share of chaos. His second marriage to actress Mary Ure was the most tragic. 4 children together, endless fights, and Mary's struggles with addiction. In 1975, she died of an overdose, a loss that haunted Shaw deeply. By then, his dependence on alcohol had worsened, echoing the same self-destruction that had claimed his father. The weight of grief and years of heavy drinking began to erode his health. Friends recalled his restless energy and volatility, often fueled by alcohol. Despite international success, especially after Jaws, His private world was fractured, stitched together by a final marriage that couldn't shield him from the damage already done. On August 28, 1978, Robert Shaw collapsed from a heart attack while driving home in Ireland. He was just 51. His fortune was around $8 million, but money could not mend the pain of his sudden passing. His ashes were scattered near his Irish home, where decades later a stone memorial was raised, inscribed with a simple prayer, "May his soul be on the right-hand side of God." Patrick Wymark, as Air Vice Marshal, Trafford Lee Mallory. He wasn't a household name like some of his co-stars, but in Battle of Britain, 1969, Patrick Wymark, then 43 years old, left his mark as Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory. He carried the role with a quiet authority, the kind that made audiences believe in the weight of command. Yet, away from the cameras, his own life was on the edge of collapse. Patrick Wymark was born on July 11, 1926, in Cleethorpes, England. He married American playwright Alwyn Buck in 1953, and together they had 4 children, including future actress Jane Wymark. To the outside world, they seemed steady, but inside the marriage there were cracks, money problems, constant work stress, and long absences that left his wife to carry the family burden. Tension turned their home life into something far less stable than the strong characters he played. His worsening drinking only made matters worse. Colleagues whispered about his excesses, and family life grew even more fragile. By the end of the 1960s, Wymark's health was faltering, though he kept working. And then came the shock. In October 1970, while on tour in Australia, he collapsed in his hotel room, gone before he could even step on stage for the play he was meant to open. Patrick Wymark died on October 20th, 1970, at just 44 years old. His estate was valued around $3 million. He was laid to rest in Highgate Cemetery, London, among other legends of British theatre. For a man who often played power on screen, his real ending was sudden, tragic, and heartbreakingly human. Barry Foster, as Squadron Leader Edwards. When Battle of Britain, 1969, reached the big screen, Barry Foster was 42, embodying Squadron Leader Edwards with a calm, steely presence. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but his character carried the weight of quiet leadership. Off-screen, though, his life carried shadows that no role could conceal. Barry Foster was born on August 21, 1927, in Beeston, England. In 1955, he married Judith Shergold, and together they built a family with 3 children. But fate delivered a blow no parent should ever face: the loss of one of their daughters, a tragedy that lingered over the household for years. Their marriage bent under grief and strain, and the cracks that appeared never fully healed. Even as his career thrived, appearing on stage and in film, Foster's health faltered. By his 70s, a heart condition threatened to silence him. In February 2002, while performing in London's West End, he collapsed mid-production. The strength that had once defined him was gone in an instant. Barry Foster died on February 11, 2002, at age 74 from a heart attack. His estate was worth around $4 million. At his funeral, friends and family divided his ashes, some resting in England, others in France, a poignant reminder of a man whose life was split between triumphs and tragedies. Michael Caine as Squadron Leader, Canfield. At just 36, Michael Caine stepped into Battle of Britain, 1969, as Squadron Leader Canfield, an American pilot in the RAF. His charm and grit made him stand out even among an all-star cast. But behind that effortless charisma lay a story of survival, hardship, and reinvention. Born Maurice Joseph Micklewhite on March 14, 1933 in London, Caine grew up in poverty, his family scarred by World War II. In 1954, he married actress Patricia Haynes, and they had one daughter, Dominique. But the marriage collapsed quickly, leaving Caine distant from his first child, a wound he later admitted never fully closed. His second marriage to Shakira Baksh in 1973 gave him stability, but even then, he carried invisible scars from his service in the Korean War, where he suffered injuries and nightmarish memories that haunted him for decades. As his fame skyrocketed, Caine's life continued to be marked by startling revelations. He discovered late in life that he had an elder half-brother, David, who had been hidden away in a mental hospital for decades because of severe epilepsy. Even his stepfather had never known. The shock of learning about a brother he never got to know was a reminder of how much had been kept from him, even within his own family. Combined with the stress of celebrity life, these experiences left him battling exhaustion and the creeping fragility of age. Yet, unlike so many of his contemporaries, Caine managed to endure, finding strength in humor, discipline, and his long marriage. Today, at 92 years old, Michael Caine is one of the last surviving titans of British cinema. With an estimated net worth of $80 million, he divides his time between London and Miami, living far from the poverty of his youth. Michael Bates as Warrant Officer Warwick. In Battle of Britain, 1969, audiences saw Michael Bates at 49, playing Warrant Officer Warwick, a tough, believable presence in the ranks of the RAF. He brought an authenticity shaped by his own military background. But his real battle was never in the skies. It came years later when illness struck mercilessly. Born on December 4, 1920, in Jhansi, India, Bates built a career in stage and screen while raising 3 children with his wife, Margaret Chisholm. Their marriage faced storms of its own, with periods of strain and eventual separation. Offstage, he was outspoken and often combative, his political views clashing even with co-stars. Behind the confidence, however, was a man increasingly isolated, lonely despite his talent and reputation. In the mid-1970s, the first signs of decline appeared. Bates was diagnosed with cancer, and within just 18 months, the disease had ravaged him. Once a commanding figure, he became frail, fighting for breath and energy. He continued working as long as he could, but his final days were filled with pain, a stark contrast to the strength he projected on screen. Michael Bates passed away on January 11, 1978, at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London. He was only 57. His fortune, about $2 million, meant little against the cruelty of his illness. Fans remember him for his roles, but those closest to him remember the heartbreaking speed with which cancer silenced a man who still had so much to give. So, the stars who once filled the skies of Battle of Britain are now memories, most taken far too soon by illness, heartbreak, or sudden tragedy. Yet their courage on screen still inspires us today. Which of their stories touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep uncovering the untold fates of Hollywood's greatest legends.